All right, I think we're recording now. And my screen share should be going down. Perfect. All right, folks, when we last left off, we just talked about the early years of Reconstruction, and we talked about the 13th Amendment ending slavery, and we talked about a couple vocab terms like franchise to give the right to vote, freedmen, meaning our newly freed slaves. We talked about the early parts of it, like black codes, and how even though slavery's over, many southern states attempted to maintain white supremacy and keep freedmen in a state of near slavery. That's what those black codes are all about. We talked about a couple early attempts to assist these freedmen by the federal government, whether it was the Freedmen's Bureau, teaching people how to read, giving them business loans, helping redistribute land confiscated from Confederates, or this early Civil Rights Act meant to give freedmen equal access to the courts. It would be really smart, guys, if you knew a bunch of examples that the federal government, or a bunch of examples in ways that the federal government will try to improve the lives of the freedmen. When I say the federal government, I mean laws, I mean Supreme Court decisions, things like that. I mean government agencies that are funded with taxpayer dollars. These are all examples of the government attempting to implement equality, attempting to essentially help the freedmen achieve some level of equality in this country. We looked at the cartoon on the Freedmen's Bureau and just really briefly talked about Andrew Johnson. Not a friend of Reconstruction, tries to use the veto against, most Reconstruction pieces of legislation. But remember, guys, Democrats and people who are, from southern states, they don't control Congress right now. It's controlled by radical Republicans. And for that reason, all of Andrew Johnson's vetoes are going to be overruled. And the legislation that's meant to help the freedmen is going to be passed. So we know 13th Amendment and slavery. Here's 14th Amendment. Most of you guys already know this one, but this is that birthright amendment to the Constitution. This gives anyone gives anyone born in this country citizenship. So it doesn't matter the status of your parents, folks. If you are born in the United States, you are a citizen. And the whole purpose of that, folks, is to make all the ex-slaves citizens of the United States. The logic being, well, if Mississippi is going to violate a freedman's rights and not make him a citizen of Mississippi, why don't we make him a citizen of the United States? And as a citizen of the United States, he's going to have rights that the state of Mississippi, for example, is going to be bound to uphold. So guys, it's kind of like a legal loophole. It's like federal government thinking, radical Republicans thinking, well, if southern states are going to keep, passing black codes and violating these rights and not allowing these people to be citizens of their state, we're going to make them citizens of the nations. And guys, think about it. Everyone who was a slave during this time period or is now freed was born here. We haven't been importing slaves since 1808. So all of these people are by definition now citizens. And that's what the 14th Amendment does. It's going to grant everyone born in the United States citizenship. And again, it's meant to assist freedmen during the time of Reconstruction. That's going to be a major component of the Reconstruction battle, because Southerners are going to resist this stuff, folks. We haven't abolished their governments yet. Remember, we're going to have a Reconstruction Act in a few minutes where Southerners are going to be really, really pissed. We haven't been occupying the South yet with military force. We're about to occupy them with military force and abolish their government. But again, 14th Amendment, anyone born here is a citizen. Next, chronologically, guys, is 1867. And so, again, we're 2 years after the end of the Civil War, and Southerners have continued to block the implementation of things that are meant to assist the freedmen. Southern states won't ratify the 14th Amendment. They certainly were fighting those civil rights laws that have been passed on the books. They are attempting to implement those black codes that we talked about. Southern states are resisting this. And since Southern states are absolutely refusing to play ball and go along with this, and guys, kind of the backstory of this is these Southern states, they just reelected all of their old Confederate leaders to office. As soon as the war is over, if you were a Confederate leader in the in the last years of the Civil War, there's a very good chance you were elected to represent your state again right when the war is over. And this really upsets the radical Republicans. Not only do the black codes piss the Republicans off, so does the fact that all of the old ex-Confederate leaders were essentially allowed to stay in power. This is why we passed the Reconstruction Act, folks. This is what you call punishing the South. It's meant to get them in line and try to really get them to understand, folks, that that their attempt to maintain white supremacy is not going to be allowed to stand. And so what the Reconstruction Act does is it abolishes Southern state governments. and it breaks up the South into 5 military districts. Now, guys, Southerners are going to say they're under military occupation. When you see like sources and literature from Southern perspectives from the 1860s or late 1860s, early 1870s, they'll talk about like, being occupied by like a foreign government. And that's part of what the legacy of Reconstruction is. Southerners are going to kind of twist that narrative around in the retelling of Reconstruction and really convince a lot of people. They'll even write that kind of narrative in Southern textbooks in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, that we were occupied by a Northern Yankee force, something like that. So be aware, guys, Southerners are going to absolutely hate this law. In order to get back into the Union, they're going to have to, when I say get back into the Union, I mean all the Southern states, they're going to have to agree to adopt the 14th Amendment and swear oaths of allegiance, any ex-Confederate leader. Not like every citizen. They're not going to make every single random Southerner swear an oath of allegiance, but they want basically the ex-Confederate leadership. They also want the ex-Confederate leadership to be disenfranchised. That's what this cartoon is all about right here. They actually are trying to take the vote away from ex-Confederate leaders who were elected. Again, they're not talking about taking the right to vote away from every Southern man, but they're trying to make an example, guys. They're really trying to punish the Confederate leadership or ex-Confederate leadership. So remembering 100% of the details of the Reconstruction Act, guys, is not the most important thing. It's a really quite complex law, but understand it's meant to essentially punish the South because the South is not playing ball. As soon as the Civil War is over, they're doing everything they can to try to maintain white supremacy and essentially not follow these different laws that radical Republicans are passing. That's why radical Reconstruction or radical Republicans abolish their governments and occupy them with military force. It's under this context, folks, that you're going to see so many different black men elected to public office, not only to local office, things like sheriff, but even state office, folks, state representatives, even congressmen, even senators, folks. There will be black governors in South Carolina. I don't know if I have the picture on this slide. No, I don't, but it's actually worth looking up real quick. It is a picture of the South Carolina state legislature in like 1875. And it's a majority black. South Carolina State Legislature. I spelled that so wrong. Oh, and I got to put the year. Let's do like 1871 or whatever. So we can see the image. This is the one I'm looking for. Here we go. See if we can make it big. All right. So anyhow, folks, this is a primary source. This is a image that was produced in the 1870s, and it's the photographic pictures of the members of the state legislature of Carolina. And when you look down here, it's got the names of the different men, and there's definitely some white men in there, but it's a majority black state legislature. That's the significance of things like the Reconstruction Act. That's how you show deep analysis. I swear to you, if you get the DBQ and it's on Reconstruction, folks, you will get the analysis point if you help the reader understand that this Reconstruction era, even though it's ultimately, not going to be that successful in the long run because we're going to have Jim Crow segregation, it will, for a time period, result in unbelievably huge gains for African Americans in terms of literacy rates, voter turnout and participation, the number of African Americans elected to political office. Anyhow, you need to be able to show those connections to be successful if you get this topic. This would be showing the Southern perspective here, guys, or maybe like a very heavy-handed view of Reconstruction. You need to know this cartoon. That woman down there is got the sash, and she's the solid South. That's what the image is depicting her as. Remember, a lot of times when you want someone to look sympathetic, you depict them feminine or even sometimes strong, feminine. There's a lot of character traits that cartoonists often use females to portray. But anyhow, the South is portrayed by a female here, dressed in white, maybe virtuous. Often the white is meant to depict virtue. And she's propping up Ulysses S. Grant and a bunch of carpet bags and bayonets, which are essentially meant to represent the military occupation of the South. And the bag says carpet bag and bayonet rule. Remember what carpetbaggers are, folks. Those are Northerners who have come to the South, in general to work with the Republican governments, assist the freedmen, or make economic opportunities building the South, rebuilding the South. This has been essentially destroyed during the Civil War. Carpetbaggers are not liked at all in the South. If you're a carpetbagger, it means you're an outsider. You're not from here, and we don't want you in here meddling with our stuff. We got our own problems down here in our state, and we don't need no carpetbaggers coming down telling us how to run things, especially with regards to our Black population. That would be the logic behind a cartoon like this. This is an anti-Reconstruction Act cartoon, or a cartoon depicting the Southern perspective during the Reconstruction Act. Cool. You don't really need to know anything about the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, folks. It's like, if you get the Reconstruction essay, you could totally write it without even mentioning this, but maybe you want to use it to fit into your argument. It just depends. It's totally up to you. But be aware, guys, even though he's the president, he keeps essentially thwarting or attempting to thwart everything Congress is trying to do. Congress is controlled by radical Republicans. Andrew Johnson keeps vetoing their legislation, and they're eventually going to impeach him for obstruction of justice. Now, this is the first time a president has actually been impeached, but he will not be removed. And they do this in the last, I believe, year or 9 months of his term, and he just serves out the rest of his term, without making much headline or much flair, much splash. It's an interesting detail, but I just don't see it coming up in your essay. I really don't. So please don't worry about the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. You should be way more concerned with things the federal government does to try to essentially help the freedmen, whether it's amendments to the Constitution, Supreme Court decisions, or laws, and you should know the Southern response. That's the most important thing for this topic. Be aware, guys, of who Ulysses S. Grant is. He's going to take over after Andrew Johnson, and he's a military hero. He's essentially the leader of the Northern Army of the Civil War during the last year or two of it, and he's a famous military general. He's got a very, very solid reputation at the end of the Civil War. Very, very controversial figure during the war itself, but once the war is over, he's cemented as a hero. During Reconstruction, folks, though, here's what you've got to understand. This is really important that you get this. This is why I'm bringing up Grant right now. During Reconstruction, he's a supporter of it. He passes a lot of different Reconstruction legislation. He is essentially as good a friend of the freedmen as they've ever had in the president's office, maybe besides Lincoln. He is a supporter in general of Reconstruction, but he's got a whole bunch of corrupt officials working for him. This is right during the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, folks. There's a very famous scandal called Credit Mobilier, where essentially Grant and his cabinet members and their hired contractors are just stealing the government's money while they're building the railroad.
Thomas C. Durant.
Go ahead.
Thomas C. Durant.
Durant, yeah, on the Union Pacific there.
The Credit Mobilier scandal was, he like made the track all, loopy. So you could.
There's so many ways that people stole money during the building of that railroad, folks, and that's only one example of the scandals. I actually I haven't studied the topic in depth. I don't even frankly know all the other scandals that his cabinet members are involved with. Grant himself is not known as a scandalous dude, but literally he puts just corrupt individuals all around him. And the easy one to remember that your textbook talks about is what Powell mentioned, Credit Mobilier. But be aware, guys, when you've got a president whose administration is really kind of wrapped in scandal, financial scandal, even if they're doing good stuff for the freedmen, it's going to undermine everything they're doing. When you have politicians that are on the take and stealing people's money, they're going to lose out to the opposing party next year. It's really easy for a Democrat to come in here. And remember, Democrats are the party of the South at this time. Democrats are the party of slavery at this time. It's really easy for a Democrat to come in and really win his congressional race pretty easily if he can connect these congressmen to Grant and the scandals in any way. So it's important you understand, guys, that even though that Grant is a friend of the freedmen and tries to pass legislation to help them, his administration and cabinet is overtly corrupt, and it's going to undermine everything ultimately that they do. It is going to cause radical Republicans to lose their seats in Congress, and it's going to ultimately cause Republicans to basically lose control of Reconstruction. There's a few other factors, like a major economic panic in 1873, but you've got to know that this is one of the reasons why Reconstruction will fail. Scandals of the Grant administration will cause all of these radical Republicans, not all of them, but many of the radical Republicans in Congress to lose their seat in the midterm elections. Don't let when the leader's scandalous at the top, they call that like affecting the down the ticket. When the ticket is like the ballot. When you go to vote, folks, you're not just voting for one candidate, you're voting for a bunch of candidates. And if you've got a Republican at the top and he's scandalous, It can hurt Republicans down the ticket. So that's what happened in this case. We'll just go for about 5 more minutes. I won't even get through all of this. I've got to, yeah, that's okay. We'll finish it up tomorrow. You need to know we talked 13th Amendment, that ends slavery. 14th Amendment grants citizenship to anyone born here. And here's the 15th Amendment, folks. This is meant to try to address some of the issues that the southern states are doing. Because remember, states choose who votes. States get to select voting ages, essentially. States get to select, for a while, states selected which gender voted. States can select, if you vote by mail, if you can vote early. States can control a lot of stuff with voting. Obviously, southern states are trying to prevent freedmen from voting there. So what the federal government is now going to do is pass another major constitutional amendment to try to allow these men to vote. And it's the 15th Amendment. And what this amendment says, and this is very controversial because it leaves women out. Ladies are going to be pissed at this. The 15th Amendment, it prevents a state from saying you can't vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. You can stop someone from voting for a lot of other reasons, but you can't do it because of the color of their skin or their race or the fact that they used to be a slave or an indentured servant. You can definitely stop them from voting if they're a woman. You can definitely stop them from voting if they're underage, if they are a felon. I don't actually know any other categories. I'm sure there are a few other categories that can get you disenfranchised today. But at that time, folks, this leaves women out. And that's what you have to remember about the 15th Amendment specifically. This is what this cartoon is all about. This is going to divide many female abolition supporters. Many of the women who are ardent abolition supporters in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, they're going to actually argue that we shouldn't ratify this amendment because it leaves women out. They're essentially saying this law is so incomplete and it sucks, it's better we don't even pass it. And they probably had a point, folks. Women aren't going to get the right to vote for another, another 40 some odd years after this. So 50 some odd years. So you got to know what the 15th Amendment does. It gives you the right to vote if you can pass, a poll test, pass a literacy test, or pay a poll tax. Essentially, folks, the 15th Amendment is so flawed. It doesn't have enough teeth. There's too many loopholes in it. It's a great idea. It's a step in the right direction. It's the basis for it. But again, folks, this is where they start slapping impossible literacy tests on the freedmen or requiring them to pay a tax. Those are going to be on the books for like 80 years. It's not really until the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s that some of those are rescinded, folks. But you can Google Google literacy test if you want to, and you can see just how difficult some of them are. Some of them are impossible. So anyhow, be aware though, it will still result, guys, in huge numbers of freedmen voting. It's going to temporarily be very successful throughout the late 1860s and early 1870s. Reconstruction's working, even though we see that there's all these holes and flaws, and we know Southerners are resisting them and sometimes straight up undermining these laws. They are still resulting in more African American voter turnout, increased literacy rates, and African Americans elected to political office. So it's working. Late 1860s and 1870s. We already talked about this. Ladies are pretty upset that they don't get included, and this is the Supreme Court case, guys, and you should probably know this one. If this is, again, how you show a deep level of analysis. For those of you that are on that fence between getting like 5 out of 7 and 6 out of 7 and 7 out of 7, this would be the way that you can do it, folks. Talking about the divide here between the ladies and essentially the abolition movement and the attempt to assist the freedmen. Minor v. Happersett, very important court case. Women, you are citizens, but being a citizen does not guarantee you the right to vote. You guys are all citizens, yet none of you have the right to vote because you are not of the legal age. Felons are citizens, don't have the right to vote. Anyhow, be aware of what minor v. Happersett is. Cool. Let's see here. I'm going to just basically stop right there, guys. You are aware of, you need to know ways Southerners will resist Reconstruction. The first way that they resisted Reconstruction, we already talked about, black codes. Remember what black codes are. Those are local ordinances. They might prevent black people from living in town. They might prevent black people from marketing their crops in town. They're meant to maintain white supremacy. That's the first way Southerners resist Reconstruction. Black codes are basically nonviolent. Also remember the vagrancy law is very important. Black codes are basically nonviolent. The Ku Klux Klan, folks, that's also a way that Southerners will resist Reconstruction that's going to end up being violent. You got to remember nonviolent ways that Southerners resist Reconstruction and violent ways that they do it. I don't need to say anything more about the Ku Klux Klan, guys. You know what they do. They intimidate people, whether they're actually going to lynch you or just beat you up or straight up murder you. You know what the Ku Klux Klan is, and you know it's a way that Reconstruction is violently opposed. Remember that tall, pointed white hood? That's not the Klan until the 19-teens. This early Klan, guys, 1860s, 1870s, looks very, very different than the Klan of the 19-teens. I have to sneeze. It might come out loud. I don't know if this video clip works anymore. I had a good Klan video clip for the KKK, but I don't know if that link is live anymore. There's a million good video clips on YouTube that are very informational if you want them, but you don't need to know hardly anything about the Klan for Reconstruction DBQ, other than it's a violent way in which Southerners resist Reconstruction. This is just vocabulary. You should know what carpetbaggers and scallywags are. We already talked about carpetbaggers and scallywags. Those are Southerners who essentially cooperate with Reconstruction. You're a Southerner. You might not like it, but you're cooperating or you're actively participating. They're going to call you a scallywag. You could write this essay, folks, without knowing those vocabulary terms. But if you truly are someone who's going to be an expert on this topic and get the top score on the DBQ, you need to at least know what that is, because they might use it in a source. Maybe those words aren't going to actually be written in your essay. You're not going to write those words, but just understanding what they are might be the difference between understanding a source or not. A carpetbagger is a Northerner who is in the South, and he's viewed as an outsider, someone who's trying to help the freedmen, and he's not wanted. Scallywags, you guys are kind of traitors. You're a Southerner who's helping the enemy. So anyhow, I've seen this cartoon a lot. I've seen it on the AP test before. This is meant as a threat to Northerners, or a threat to carpetbaggers, or a threat to scallywags. The intended audience of this would be carpetbaggers, folks. We have two men hanging from a tree right here. The donkey, oftentimes when they would hang you, they would tie the rope around your neck, around the tree, and they would sit you on the donkey, and then they slap the donkey on the butt, and the donkey walks away, and you're left hanging and swinging. So this is a threat. I don't know, it's blurry at the top, but it says a prospective scene in the city of Oaks, 4th of March, 1869. It's a threat, warning to what might happen if carpetbaggers or scallywags are up to no good, apparently. Anyhow, I'm going to leave it there, folks. I'm going to summarize the rest tomorrow, and I'm going to tell you how Reconstruction will ultimately fail. You need to know how Reconstruction will ultimately fail. So to summarize what the most important things with Reconstruction are, what the federal government does to help the freedmen, Supreme Court cases, laws, what have you. You need to know how Southerners resist Reconstruction, both violently and non-violently. And you need to know why Reconstruction ultimately fails, which we'll talk tomorrow, and what the long-term legacy of it is, which we'll do tomorrow. So cool. Any questions before I stop recording, folks? No? No questions? All right, folks.
Oh, good.
Well, again, it's like my core group here. Where now the core group, it was like 18 or 19. Now it's like down to 10, but that's okay. I appreciate you guys being on here, and we'll do 12:30 again tomorrow. So please, if you have some fellow nerds that you know haven't been tuning in but might actually enjoy this or get something out of it, maybe encourage them to tune in. So cool. All right, guys, thanks for being here. I'm going to stop recording, and if you have